So in the history of the Druid in Diablo 4, basic skill builds have been quite hit or miss. In some seasons, they were incredibly strong. In some seasons, they were completely and utterly useless. But going into the Lord of Hatred expansion, there has actually been multiple new basic skill builds that are actually end game viable. And today I wanted to go over one that I haven't seen pretty much anybody else using at this point in the end game, because this is going to be a very viable Torment 12 Storm Strike build that is not only just very good for everything in the end game, but is potentially one of the best boss farming builds in the game, at least for Druids. And I think we have to start with our Talisman because the unique charm we're using is one of our biggest damage increases with this build, and I think is one of the big reasons that this build can actually work. And this is going to be a werebear build because that's something Druids can do now. All of your basic skills you could choose between werewolf, human, or werebear. So we're a werebear Storm Strike build, and the unique charm we're using that is so incredibly important is Might of the Urzine. Gain up to 13% bonus damage for each stack of resolve while in werebear. And you gain 1 stack of resolve every second while in werebear. Now we can have 56 stacks of resolve. That is my cap at this point in the build. So that's over a 700% multiplicative damage increase just based off of getting some specific rolls on our gear and using Might of the Urzine. So this is such a massive damage increase that this build actually does enough damage to be quite strong in Torment 12. Now the set we're using is Storm Shepherd. So the 2 set of this is Storm skills no longer cost spirit, but anytime you use a Storm skill, it uses all of your spirit to give you a damage boost up to 75%. So just a big damage increase. And one of the main reasons we're using this is because Storm skills no longer cost spirit. This will be very important with some of our gear mixtures. Then for our 3 set, we get a massive damage reduction. We gain Cyclone armor for free, meaning it doesn't have to be on our bar, and it gives us 30% damage reduction, and it just auto triggers when something gets close to us. So we will not only gain the massive passive portion of Cyclone armor, which is a massive increase to all resistances, but we get 30% DR, and it doesn't have to be on our bar. Then the 5 set is actually really insane for this build. Storm skills have a 20% chance to double cast and a 5% chance to triple cast. When it double casts, they do 100% increased damage. When they triple, it does a 300% increase. Now you'll see this when you're in, say, boss fights or you're doing a bunch of boss farms. You'll notice when this procs because the boss's health will absolutely just delete. It's pretty crazy when you get some of the procs of this. And that brings us to our skill tree, starting with our main damaging ability, which is going to be Storm Strike. So you're putting 12 points into this. Now at a baseline, this is just a basic skill that you hit and it chains to 2 additional enemies. Now with all of our stuff mixed together, which includes one of our uniques and through our different points selected here, this now chains 12 times. Now Storm Strike actually works a bit differently in the expansion than it used to because all of those chains can hit the same target. So if you're facing a boss and there's only a boss there with you, all 12 of those additional chains will hit that one target. That's why you see if you auto attack like one thing, go hit a boss or a target dummy, it just hits a ridiculous amount of times. Now where this gets really ridiculous is when we choose our variant. Also make sure to choose werebear because you do need to be in werebear for our big damage increases. But when you take chain reaction, Storm Strike chains 3 additional times and Storm Strike's damage is increased by 20% each time it chains. So essentially when you use this, every single time it chains, it does more damage. So technically the final hit of the chain of the 12 chains does the most damage, which is also pretty ridiculous. You'll see that, let's say you're in an AoE situation where it's chaining to different things. You'll see sometimes that like the last thing that gets hit just dies, but everything else you're facing or a lot of the other things you're facing don't die. It's because the more it chains, the more damage those chains actually do. So it's pretty ridiculous. Also because of the unique we're using that's specific to Storm Chain, any chain increasing thing we get doubles it. So we just have double the amount of chains. That's how we get 12 total. Then for our side upgrades, we're taking Storm Strike may chain 1 additional time, so it's 2, and then we get Ferocity. Storm Strike grants 1 stack of Ferocity when first dealing damage. So we'll just have Ferocity, which is attack speed increases at all times. And you'll probably have already seen in the footage that the amount of damage this thing does is pretty ridiculous, especially when you're just against one target, because you're just hitting one target with the initial hit and 12 additional chains like instantly. It's pretty ridiculous. Then we're going down and we are taking Lightning Storm. Now we only have 1 point into this, and this is just to proc some additional things. The variant we're using is Lightning Storm can be toggled passively and it'll just keep lightning storming. So basically when you use this variant, variant, you just toggle Lightning Storm on and it keeps going. And because of the set charms we're using, this doesn't cost spirit, so it will never cancel in combat. Also, attack speed, which we are using a bunch of, also increases our Lightning Storm proc rates. So you'll see when we're in combat how quick Lightning Storm is going. Gets pretty ridiculous, and this can deal some decent-ish damage even in Torment 12, just because of how much overall damage increases we're getting when in combat. But this is primarily to proc other things, specifically for one of the uniques we're using, and for some of its upgrades for it, so you get more strikes from the top upgrade, even more when you have ferocity, and especially if you're against like a big boss, it can all hit at the same time. And then the bottom upgrade, we get more movement speed while it's active. So this will proc things, deal some additional damage, and overall be a pretty big upgrade that's just more passive damage and passive procs. Also, this does have lucky hit, and one of our main ways in which we'll stay in our ultimate with this build is lucky hitting. So that's one of the big things we'll be proccing is lucky hitting to reduce our ultimate's cooldown. But we'll get into that as we go further into the build. Then for our defensives, we're using a lot of them. We're using Earthen Bulwark. This would just be procced through one of our rune combinations, which will actually be fully passive, but it takes the upgrades through this. So top upgrade increases its duration and increases the base amount of barrier you get. All this is a massive barrier based upon our max life. Gets more the more you upgrade it. The top upgrade actually makes its duration be 12 seconds. The rune, the proxis, is normally only 3. This will actually increase it to 12, which is pretty massive. So it'll be up 100% of the time unless you instantly get hit by something really hard and it breaks. The variant we're taking is we gain 3 stacks of resolve, and it does a little bit of like earth damage around you. Primarily taking this because we have 56 stacks of resolve we want to get up to. It actually takes a while to stack that up, so this just helps it stack much more quickly. The bottom upgrade we're taking is Overpower. When we get our Earthen Bulwark, we gain stacks of Overpower, which are just additive damage at a baseline. We do have some multiplicative increases to that. And then for the bottom upgrade, we just get 2 stacks of Overpower when this procs. Now that's only additive damage, which can be nice, just some additional damage, but you can also get some multiplicative increases from some other things. Then we're taking Cyclone Armor. Like I mentioned, Cyclone Armor doesn't need to be on our bar, and we still get all the resistances. Based upon our upgrades, we have almost 100% increase to all resistances as a passive, and then we should get the 30% DR from our charm set. The bottom upgrade increases our resistances. The variation is just increases the bonuses of its passive. That's how we get almost 100% bonus to all resist. Then the thing we're actually having on our bar is Debilitating Roar, just a damage reduction to all enemies around us. The side upgrade is increase its duration, which is up to 4.5 seconds with Fortified. The other side upgrade is we gain 30% increase to our max life when this is active, and the variation is increases all of its effects and durations. Now, when you look at the tooltip of Debilitating Roar when you're in combat, you want your actual duration to be about 3 seconds below the cooldown, because with the increased duration, it increases when you're fortified by an additional 3 seconds, but doesn't show that on the tooltip. Also keep in mind, there is something weird about the tooltip when you're not in combat. So my cooldown of this ability is actually longer. So just keep that in mind. Go look at this when you're in combat, go test at the training dummy, and you just want your duration to be about 3 seconds shorter than the actual cooldown. You just want this up basically 100% of the time. And then we are going over and we are taking 2 companion skills, which is a bit confusing until you see what they're for. So first off, we have Wolves. The variation we're taking is increases all of Wolf's upgrades. This is because we can take attack speed. When your Wolf's critically strike, you gain 40% attack speed for 10 seconds. Now keep in mind, the attack speed cap is 100%. We get 40% of our attack speed cap just from these 3 points, which is pretty ridiculous. You just put these on your bar. You never use the active ability. Your Wolves will just auto attack stuff, and they will crit because they're based off your crit. So they will basically always crit, and you'll always have 40% increased attack speed in combat based upon this. Pretty massive. Then we are using Poison Creeper. Now this is primarily because it's something we can keep on our bar, and we get 10% fortify every 3 seconds as a passive. This is one of the main reasons I ended up taking this, but the variation also makes this an aura around us for 4 seconds. Now poisons everything. We also have the increased duration, so it actually lasts for 7 seconds. Now we do have other ways to poison. This is primarily just to poison stuff very easily and quickly in AoE situations, but this is primarily just to give us fortify. If Poison Creeper's on your bar with this passive, you gain 10% fortify every 3 seconds. This mixed with something else will give us all the fortify we ever need. Then we're scrolling all the way down for our last ability. We're taking Rizzy Rage as our ultimate. At a baseline, this is a long duration ultimate that gives you Berserk, which is pretty nice. That's a 25% damage increase, 15% movement speed increase, and 20% bonus armor. The upgrades we're taking is reduces cooldown, so it can be up more often. Then Fortify, we gain 100% Fortify when this is cast to shore up the rest of our Fortify. The upgrade, which is the main reason we're taking it, is your damage increased by 5% up to 20%, and this just stacks up by taking or dealing damage. So it's just a massive damage increase. And because of some of the other things we're using. If you could stay in combat constantly hitting things, this will not really have a cooldown, especially if you're say in like a higher pit run and you could just constantly be auto attacking stuff. You can have this up 100% of the time, but it's primarily just massive damage increases. Then for our Paragon boards, we're starting with Headhunter, a bonus to normal nodes within range. Secondaries increase damage to elites. Legendaries increase damage. Then the first board we're taking is going to be Survival Instincts. This is basically just a damage increase when in werebear. The glyph we're taking is Dominate, a bonus to rare nodes. Secondaries increase damage while you have Overpower, which is why we get Overpower from Earthen Bulwark. And then the legendaries just increase damage. Also, keep in mind, I did this on my first board because one of the rare nodes is increased to max life. And when you have this, which is a bonus to rare nodes, I'm getting almost 32% increased max life just from this one node. You want to make sure to have the secondary bonus of this, which if it's on your first board, it'll take less dexterity. Then we're going over to the left. We're taking Thunderstruck. Storm skills do increase damage and also have increased critical strike chance. The glyph we're taking is Earth and Sky, bonus to magic nodes within range. Secondary nature skills do increase damage to vulnerable enemies. The legendaries increase nature magic damage, so just some big damage increases. Then we're going up and we're taking Ancestral Guidance. If you're spending 75 spirit, you deal increased damage. This will be up basically 100% of the time because we constantly generate spirit through some specific things, but it's constantly used because of our charm set. So this will just be a damage increase. The glyph we're taking is Werebear. Increased damage while in Werebear, damage reduction while in Werebear. The legendary is more damage increase while in Werebear. And also, since we're a Storm Strike basic skill build, you do have to be in melee at all times, so you do want some increased survivability through some things that you can normally take damage increases. Then the final board is going to be Constricting Tendrils, increased damage against poison enemies, and then a lucky hit chance to poison enemies. This is to shore up our overall poison. We have this in our Poison Creeper. Then the glyph we're taking is Spirit, increased to critical strike damage. The secondary is when you crit things, they take more damage from you stacking up. The legendary is increased critical strike damage. Then for our Spirit Boons, we're taking Wariness to take reduced damage from elites, Avian Wraith for increased critical strike damage, Iron Feather for increased max life. Then we're taking Calamity to extend the duration of our ultimate by 35%. And then we're taking Combo for the Storm, which is a lucky hit, which has a chance to reduce our ultimate's cooldown. Now, Greasy Rage gives such a massive damage bonus, we want it up as much as possible, and its cooldown is massive. It's like 80 seconds. But if you could constantly hit things with Storm Strike with the mixture of these two skills, you can actually have Greasy Rage up majority of the time. Now, when you're in combat where enemies are dying much more quickly, you won't have it up 100% of the time because you need something there to constantly hit. And if you have something there to constantly hit, like you go try this on a target dummy, you just spam Storm Strike, you can have Greasy Rage up before it goes down just because of how much we can lucky hit. If things are dying too quickly, you won't have it up, but that also means things are dying too quickly, so you don't necessarily need the damage boost at all times anyway. Then the Mercenaries, we're taking Rahir as our main to take increased armor from its passive. Then his Provoke skill, when he provokes enemies, you take reduced damage stacking up. Then Mocking Lure, when things are taunted, which is through Provoke or other things, they take increased damage from you. Then the Reinforcement, we're taking his Oldkin with Fields of Anguish. When he puts this on enemies, it slows them, makes them deal reduced damage. So basically just more damage reduction from us. Just put that on any skill. And then that brings us into our gear. So for our gems on your weapon, which we are using a one-hander and an off-hander, you're using lightning damage multiplier. On one piece of armor, you want to increase willpower. And on your jewelry, you either want all diamonds or 2 diamonds and 1 fire resistance increase, because a lot of the fire damage affixes on enemies do way too much damage right now. Then for the rune sets we're using, maintain at least 1 active companion for 5 seconds, gaining offering up to 5 summons. And this happens every 5 seconds. So every 5 seconds, we get a new Earthen Bulwark, because remember, we have Poison Creepers and we have wolves at a baseline. So every 5 seconds we get a new Earthen Bulwark, but our Earthen Bulwark lasts for 12 seconds. So if it doesn't break, you'll always have a barrier up. Then for our other rune set, you store up offering every 0.3 seconds, cast a non-basic skill to use all of that. This will give us critical strike chance up to 10%. This will be active at all times. This is primarily to shore up our critical strike chance so we can get some better rolls on our other armor pieces, because you want close to 100% crit and you want close to 100% attack speed. But then we have our uniques and our mythics. Starting with our mythics, Arrow Perdition on our helmet just for massive damage increases, also has a good critical strike chance roll, which is nice. On your chest piece, I'm using Tyrael's Might just for massive damage resistances, but you can also just use a very tanky legendary chest piece. And with some of the fixes coming soon, if one of the legendary aspects is defensive is fixed, we will be changing this out for that new defensive aspect that will hopefully be fixed, which will give us massive damage reduction based upon our resolve. Then for our other uniques, our main one is Erudite's Inexorable Will, which is a ring. Storm Strike chains twice as much and gains 10% increased bonus damage. The bonus damage is nice, but chains twice as much. If we don't have this equipped, our Storm Strike with all of the chaining increase effects only does 6 chains. But with this, it does 12. And keep in mind, every new chain increases the damage. So this is just massive damage, basically doubles or more than doubles the damage of our Storm Strike skill. Pretty ridiculous, and this is required. Then in our main hand, we are using Shard of Varenthal, which basic skills deal up to 100% increased damage, but cost 25 primary resource. Now, because of our set charms we're using, doesn't actually cost any resource. Because our Storm Strike is a storm skill, it costs nothing. But what's really interesting is Storm Strike at a baseline generates you 15 spirit. But because of our charm set, meaning this weapon's effect doesn't cost anything and nothing else costs anything, we will actually generate 15 spirit every time we use Storm Strike. That is also what we're generating to give us our damage boost from our charm set, because we will use a Storm Strike, it will use all of our spirit, then give us that 15 spirit, which on our next Storm Strike will be used. So with the next Storm Strike, we use 15 spirit, but gain an additional 15, which will keep stacking up our damage bonuses, make sure we don't actually use any spirit or can't use something. So this is just a pretty massive damage increase for our main hand. And then for our final unique, which you don't necessarily always need to use, you have Pain Gorger's Gauntlets. So when you hit something with a non-basic skill, it marks them. The next basic skill you use will hit all marked enemies for a massive damage increase. So you're basically just spreading around your basic skill damage. This is a unique, and uniques are randomly rolled, so they're very, very hard to get really well-rolled items. My normal gloves that I use that aren't this unique are so much better rolled that these are still probably doing more overall damage. But if you're in an AoE situation, you want to get a Pain Gorger's Gauntlet. If you can't get the best roll, it's still better in AoE. If you're in single target, getting a very well-rolled pair of legendary gloves is probably better. And on those gloves, you would use a damage increase while you have barrier, which will always have up because of our Earthen Bulwark. But in AoE situations, Pain Gorgers is better. And if you can get Pain Gorgers as good of rolls as you can on your legendary gloves, they're just going to be better. It's just much harder to get well-rolled Pain Gorgers. Then for the rest of our legendary aspects, on your necklace, you want while fortified, you deal increased damage, will always be fortified. The second roll you get on your necklace through transfiguration system, you want storm skills to make enemies vulnerable, and you deal increased vulnerable damage or increased damage of vulnerable enemies. This will always be proc, and because all of our main damage is storm damage, everything will be vulnerable instantly. Super important and a very, very good roll to have on your necklace. Then for our other legendary aspects, we want Moonrise. Damaging an enemy with a basic skill gives you increased attack speed, stack up to 5 times. When you hit max stacks, you also get 60% increased basic skill damage and increased movement speed. So attack speed and increased damage, very, very good. Then basic skills grant increased damage, stacking up to 10 times. So this would be 60% increase to all your damage just by using your basic skills, which would be stacked up very quickly. Then on our boots, you want your form bonuses are increased by up to 80%. Now our form bonuses for werebear are increased max life and a damage reduction. So this is just a really nice survivability increase. Then for our legs, you gain 30% DR and poison enemies deal less damage to you. This is why we also want these additional poisoning effects through Poison Creeper and through our Paragon board. So everything is poison, so they deal less damage to us. So we need a lot of this for the increased survivability, which this build will have over 3 million toughness while actually in combat, which is pretty good because we are in melee range at all times. Now, like usually, there will be a build planner linked in the description where you can find all the best stats you want rolled. One of the big things you want to keep an eye out for is any piece of armor that you can have max resolve stacks on. So for your tempering, you can get max resolve stacks on your helmet, on your chest piece, on your legs, and on your necklace. So you can get a tempering, make sure to GA that tempering, and then when you masterwork, make sure to get the masterwork GA on that as well. So that's 12 maximum resolve stacks on 4 different pieces. That's how we have 56 resolve stacks, which massively increases our damage. And if that legendary aspect I mentioned is fixed in the future, that will give us up to 4% DR per resolve stack, which if that's actually fixed, we'll get another 220% damage reduction, which is kind of ridiculous, which is what we will replace Tyrion's Might for. A legendary with that aspect on it when it's fixed, and just a bunch of increased defensives. And if that is fixed in the future, this build will actually be so much stronger. You'll probably be able to do like 120 plus pits easily at that point. But that is the entirety of this Storm Strike Druid build. I'm pretty proud I put this together because I looked at all of the other websites when I was theory crafting this, and I could not find really any Storm Strike build or even any Storm Strike build that was actually in any in-game content. I didn't really see anybody else running this or making builds or build planners on this. So I just kind of threw this together over time, and it ended up actually being pretty strong. Like I mentioned, I've been doing Mephisto runs on this. I've been able to do anything on Torment 12. Any boss in the boss ladder on Torment 12, this thing absolutely destroys. Like I mentioned, this thing is actually better at killing Mephisto and makes it easier than even doing Mephisto with the companion Druid build, which is doing like 140 pit runs. So this build is pretty absurd in pretty much any endgame content. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.